Hi, everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support, and we are honored this evening to welcome Marigrace Becker from the Memory Hub at the University of Washington. So Marigrace is a medical social worker who is the program manager for community education and impact at the Memory Hub, a place for dementia-friendly community, collaboration, and impact. Marigrace develops and facilitates education, support, and engagement programs that promote living well with dementia. She also produces resources like the Patient and Family Handbook, Living with Memory Loss. She works closely with community partners to spearhead local initiatives that challenge stigma and build understanding. She is a member of the Dementia Seattle Stewardship Team and leads the Dementia Friendly Communities Project Team for the Dementia Action Collaborative, implementing the Washington State Plan to address Alzheimer's and other dementias. Welcome, Marigrace. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Lynn, and thank you, Julie. I'm so pleased and honored to be able to present today, and I have so much respect for Hope Dementia Support and the pioneer you are there in Clark County, moving things forward with building dementia-friendly communities. I really admire your work.
Let me interrupt just 1 second to remind people that they can put their questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will get to them at the ending of your talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. Give me a moment and I'll go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint for this evening. Okay, here we are. So again, my name is Marigrace Becker and I work out of the UW Memory and Brain Wellness Center, managing our community center, the Memory Hub, that just opened about 1.5 years ago in Seattle. And I'm very, very passionate about building dementia-friendly communities and have been involved in that work for many years now in the Seattle area, and also trying to help inspire and equip other communities around the state. So I couldn't be happier to be here today. This is what I'm hoping to cover in the next about hour or so, give or take, leaving time for questions. But I'll do a quick snapshot overview around dementia. And then we'll give an introduction to the idea of dementia-friendly communities. I'll hone in on 2 aspects of moving forward with dementia-friendly communities, which includes public awareness focus and also a dementia-friendly program focus, and tell you a little bit more about what we call the Momentia movement here in Seattle that has grown to other areas in Washington and different parts of the nation, and give you a lot of different examples of kinds of programs that can be useful for building dementia-friendly communities within your region. And then I'll touch on a model that comes out of what's called Dementia Friendly America, which is a national model for moving forward with dementia-friendly communities, and then leave us with some ideas for what we can do in terms of next steps in our own areas. So first, just a bit of overview around dementia. I'm sure for most of us joining today, this is not new, but just to have us all on the same page. You know, that term dementia is not one particular disease. It's a general term, an umbrella term describing different changes within memory or thinking abilities that are significant enough to interfere with someone's day-to-day life. So it could be memory, it could be things like judgment, decision-making, communication, orientation to time and place, vision changes, and other things. And then just that term dementia doesn't tell you what is the root cause. So there's many, many different types of underlying conditions or diseases that can cause the symptoms of dementia. And that most common type of dementia, underlying disease, is Alzheimer's. So there's approximately 6 million Americans who live with Alzheimer's. And here in our state, there's around 120,000 persons who live with dementia, and another over 300,000 family caregivers. So not a small number. I'm sure most of us here today have either are experiencing dementia or caring for someone with dementia, or know someone living with dementia, or know someone who knows someone who lives with dementia. So very common experience, and which makes it all the more important to think through How can we as a community be supportive to persons who are walking that path? So the numbers are continuing to grow. And I think what I like to mention alongside just the kind of cut and dry statistics is just recognizing that for a long time, the way that we have framed dementia or changes in memory and thinking within society or within the media has been quite negative and full of a lot of stigma and misunderstanding about dementia, which can lead to fear and shame and social isolation of persons with dementia and family caregivers. And we're seeing shifts in that, I would say, in the last 5 or 10 years or so. But part of building a dementia-friendly community is really laying that groundwork of heightened understanding to counter myths and to counter stigma about dementia, so that those of us who live with dementia or care for someone with dementia can be fully engaged. Speaking of dementia-friendly communities and what they're all about, so in a nutshell, the definition that I use is the dementia-friendly community is a region, town, or neighborhood in which people with dementia are respected, included, and empowered to remain active participants and contributors in community life. And you'll see this image here. It's from Dementia Friendly America, but it's focusing on all the different parts of a community playing a role in ensuring that people with dementia can continue to be active and engaged within that community. So looking at having dementia accessible housing options, healthcare, libraries, public services, first responders, faith communities, just everyday neighbors, having that awareness and ability to be supportive. Very similar to, I would correlate it to like the disability rights movement and ADA, but thinking about for persons with cognitive changes or cognitive disabilities, what we can do to ensure that the communities remain accessible. A couple quotes from a few local advocates with memory loss and dementia, answering that question, what does a dementia-friendly community mean to you? Well, on the left, Miriam Marquez, who's been a very long-term advocate with the Alzheimer's Association, living with Alzheimer's. She says a dementia-friendly community is where people care for people with dementia. The point is respect, caring about people. I live alone, but I have many, many friends in my apartment building. I tell everyone at some point that I have Alzheimer's and they watch out for me. And then Bob in Tacoma, another advocate living with memory loss, says a dementia-friendly community means awareness and respect of persons with dementia and their caregivers to help us feel comfortable. There are people in the community where I go routinely, like Denny's or the golf course, who are aware of my dementia. I'm treated with acceptance, patience, and respect. I feel good about it. Both of those personal statements and perspectives, I think, really honing in on that idea of respect and being able to participate, in social situations or within the community, doing the things that they enjoy, recognizing that they're not going to be shunned or misunderstood or set aside or overlooked based on the fact that they have some changes with their memory or their thinking. In Washington, there's a statewide group called the Dementia Action Collaborative that put together this work on what are those 9 key factors and what helps build a dementia-friendly community. I wanted to just share those today, but I'm going to hone in on just a couple main themes from this through the rest of the talk. So in a dementia-friendly community, people with memory loss are respected as valuable members of the community, can participate confidently throughout their community, knowing that there's dementia awareness in their midst. They can stay connected to their family, friends, and neighbors. They can enjoy meaningful lives with access to all the things within their community. They can have a voice in their community and can even have a leadership role in anything that is particularly impacting their own lives. They can have access to early diagnosis and post-diagnostic resources. They have transportation options that are accessible, housing options that are accessible and provide the support that they want or need, and also opportunities to navigate neighborhoods and public spaces in ways that are accessible. There's a lot of different ways to talk about it, but these were the 9 key factors that we identified some years back when we were thinking through what does it mean here in Washington to have a dementia-friendly community. So I want to hone in on a couple main themes, and these themes are topics that communities that are initially moving forward with this idea of, yes, we want to become more dementia friendly, tend to hone in on, or tends to be kind of the first step. So one area is around public awareness and reducing stigma. So kind of related to the idea of being respected in the community and being able to participate confidently in the community because people with dementia know that people who live and work there are dementia aware. Another theme that I'll hone in on after that is making sure that a community has opportunities for social and civic engagement that are accessible and inclusive of persons with dementia. So there's a lot of other changes you can do within a community in terms of adjusting the built environment and the systems that are in place. But many times when a community is just getting started with what are those first things we can do to become more dementia friendly, that first layer of dementia awareness is often a very, very first step in then thinking through social and community-based activities that can build a communal life and engagement for people with dementia is often that second step. So I'm going to really focus in on those ones today and kind of talk about how we've approached that in Seattle. I already know that Hope is really leading the way in Clark County with ways to do that there. And we can think about how we can do it in whatever region we're in. So I'm going to give just a few examples around that public awareness and stigma reduction theme, and going back to some early examples worldwide, and then showing how that's played out here in Washington. But thinking about public awareness and stigma reduction. So there was a program in Japan back in the mid-2000s called Ninchisho Supporters. And there was a recognition of, even within the language itself, the word for dementia had negative connotations to it. You can see the image there at the bottom. And they chose to actually change the word that was being associated with dementia to have it be a neutral word. So instead of having those characters that represented idiocy and stupidity, so having that negative connotation, shifting over to have it be more neutral, medical-oriented word with those two characters meaning cognition and disorder. So a change in language, but then also throughout the country of Japan, they pulled together what they call this national caravan or national effort for Ninchisho supporters, training community members to go out and offer 90-minute talks about what is dementia, challenging stigma about dementia, and helping build support in the community. So this is an example kind of early on with efforts to build awareness and challenge stigma. Another example early on worldwide, so this was back in 2013 in the United Kingdom, they took a look actually at that program from Japan and decided they wanted to roll out something similar that then they could help spread around the world, and came up with this program, Dementia Friends, which we'll say more about here in Washington as well. But Dementia Friends also works by training community volunteers to go out and give a talk. It covers 5 key messages that you see on the screen there, including dementia is not a natural part of aging. It's caused by diseases of the brain. It impacts more than memory. Possible to live well with dementia. And there's more to the person than the dementia. You can see by the type of messages there, it's not a really heady, academic, medically oriented training. It's really helping just counter some basic misunderstandings about dementia and helping people recognize some of these ideas that actually, it is possible to live well with dementia with support, and dementia doesn't define a person. There's more to them than that. Coming home to Washington, I want to give several examples of ways this idea of public awareness and stigma reduction has happened here in our own state. One example is this effort by Don Reddington. He was an individual living with younger onset Alzheimer's over in Twisp, Washington. So living in a small community, he could have chosen to really hide his diagnosis. And as soon as he came out, everybody, a small town sometimes can be, as soon as you say something, many people can hear about it rapidly. But he chose not to hide. And he chose to share actually very, very publicly about his own experience, and went to the local newspaper and asked if he could write a series of articles and have them be published. just tracing his own experience with Alzheimer's and letting people know what he would want the general public to know about what it's like. So he really took a powerful step there to challenge stigma and bring greater awareness. And it ended up being published in all the articles went out in the newspaper, but then they were published in a separate magazine later that is pictured here. And his quote, "Although some days are better than others, my goal is to enjoy life and remember that life is good." Which again, he was bringing that message forward that life doesn't end with a diagnosis, and there are ways to continue engaging with life and engaging with your community. He took it to the next step with his daughter, Donnie Reddington. A few years later, they organized a motorcycle and sidecar tour and rallies in 6 cities across Washington. You can see their route there, and they went and they were distributing magazines that he had written and sharing a bit about his own experience and Donnie's experience as a caregiver. And again, I just like to highlight this as an example of what ordinary people on the ground can do in terms of raising awareness and helping build that understanding about dementia. A few other images from their grand tour. You see Mount Rainier and the Capitol building and the Space Needle. Other places they stopped and spread their message about living well with Alzheimer's and building a more dementia-friendly community. Here in Seattle, I definitely want to call out and recognize a group that it's called The Gathering Place. It's an early stage memory loss social and support group that meets at a senior center called Greenwood Senior Center. The group started meeting in about 2012 or so, and they early on felt very empowered and wanting to share with other people in the wider community about what is it like to live with dementia, what would they hope others would know, what kind of misunderstandings could be put aside. And so this is just an example, one example of an advocacy project that they did. This man here is named Neil, and he came up with a statement about what he wanted the world to know about living with dementia and did a collage piece about it as well. But as you can see, his message is, "I'm still here. I'm not gone. I'm not a shell of who I once was. In fact, I am alive and I'm still here. I'm still a part of things. I'm still a part of the community." I'll show you a few other of the messages that they came up with. This one says, "I can't remember." And another person saying, "You're not alone." And this one says, "It's hard, but we'll get through it." They made a documentary also where they shared these same messages, and the art, like these portraits with them holding their messages, is actually up in the memory clinic at where I work within the University of Washington. So they've really, their message is getting out there broadly, and I really respect their courage to go ahead and share their own story and let the world know. This is another example of just, again, kind of ways to build public awareness and challenge stigma about dementia in that broader effort to build dementia-friendly communities. So some of us might have heard about back in the day, back in 2016, the Art of Alzheimer's was a local nonprofit in Seattle, and their whole focus was trying to challenge stigma about dementia and build understanding through showcasing the creative capacities and artwork of people with dementia. And they did that through exhibits. They did an exhibit at Seattle City Hall that was up for a number of months. And then again at the Washington State Convention Center and the Seattle Center. They brought the exhibit to University of Washington and medical centers locally, and they also toured around the state. This caught all kinds of press, a lot of positive press. And I think the thing about that the founder recognized was that maybe, dementia in and of itself, there might be a lot of fear around it. People might feel afraid to talk about it or to consider like meeting someone with dementia, but looking at art is not scary. Looking at art is accessible and kind of draws you in. So being able to showcase artwork as a conversation starter and as a catalyst of a new understanding of, oh, people with dementia can be creative and can be artistic. It can open up a new conversation and a new way of thinking about what's possible in the midst with dementia. All right, I already talked about the Global Dementia Friends effort, but Here in our state, we've also seen a lot of forward progress with the Dementia Friends program via Dementia Friends Washington. So here it's led by the Dementia Action Collaborative underneath the UW Memory and Brain Wellness Center. We have a program manager for the program, and have been operating that program since 2018, piloting it and evaluating it, and finding that this, again, it's like a train the trainer model where community volunteers go out and give talks about dementia, covering 5 key messages that challenge stigma. And the evaluation found that it was effective in changing people's attitudes toward persons with dementia for the better. It's now active in 20 counties, including Clark County, thanks to leadership of Hope Dementia Support. And if you'd like more info on that program and getting involved as a volunteer, giving the talks, or if you're outside of that county and want to bring the program to your area, you can also take a look at how to do that at dementiafriendswashington.uw.edu. All right, so we've been talking about various examples of how to challenge stigma or build awareness about dementia as one foundational avenue of building a dementia-friendly community. And now I'm going to shift over and talk about another main theme within building dementia-friendly communities, which is shifting from a world of social isolation toward a world of social connection, and thinking about ways that we can actually build communities where there's a lot of different accessible, inclusive, and tailored programming within the community for people with dementia to engage in and stay connected rather than becoming isolated. Here's a quote from a woman living with dementia here in Seattle who says, "At one point, my doctor told me stay active and stay social. That's the best advice I've gotten anywhere." But how do you do it? So again, I like to kind of look at where were the beginnings of some of these ideas about social connection and community engagement for persons with dementia. So one example is the Alzheimer Cafe, which now I'm sure many of us are familiar with, but the idea of the Alzheimer Cafe was established in the Netherlands back in 1997 by a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist saw all the stigma and the tendency to become isolated for persons with dementia, and thought, I just would love to start something that allows people to come together, break through those barriers, break through the stigmas, and have a regular social gathering. And the way they did it, there was often some kind of education that went along with it. That model came to the US in 2008, and the American model focused a lot more simply on pure social connection, social engagement. So coming together for like on a regular, maybe monthly basis, people with dementia, family caregivers, connecting with each other and finding that opportunity to engage rather than being isolated. It's a growing movement. Before the pandemic, there were hundreds upon hundreds of memory cafes or Alzheimer cafes in the US, and there were about 22 that met on a monthly basis here in Washington. And then during the pandemic, some things went online, and now here in Washington, we're seeing the reemergence of this type of program. Once again, it's one of the simplest types of programs you can start, and often operated out of community spaces like libraries or faith communities or senior centers. And I'll say more about that in a bit. So now bringing things home to Washington and specifically to the Seattle area and thinking about programs for social engagement, I'd love to share a bit about a movement called Dementia. And some of us may have heard of it before, but Dementia is a grassroots movement that focuses on empowering people with memory loss and their loved ones to stay active and connected in the community, specifically through programs that are set up in the community and tailored to be accessible to people with dementia. And this movement started back in 2010-ish or so. There were a smattering of beginnings of programs set up to be designed for people with dementia and community spaces. The Fry Art Museum began a program, Taproot Theater began a program, and at the same time, there was a growth of what I call dementia self-advocacy, or persons with memory loss and dementia beginning to speak up more loudly around, we are still here, we deserve to be included, and we're a part of the community. So any part of the community like libraries, parks and recreation, senior centers, etc., those should be accessible to us too, and helping to make that happen. A few years after that, there was a catalyst in the form of Dr. John Zeisel, who has what he calls it takes a village model for dementia-friendly communities. He came and spoke at the Alzheimer's Association Discovery Conference in 2014, I believe, and talked about, again, how do you engage all different parts of a community, like your symphony and museums and theaters and cafes, to create social programs for people with dementia. And in the Seattle area, we'd already been doing it a bit, but hearing him talk about it more broadly added some, flames to the fire, some added inspiration. And we ended up starting first a coalition, and then loosely calling it a movement, Momentia, trying to move forward this idea of engaging lots of different community spaces and community organizations to set up social programming for people with dementia. And Momentia as a movement affirms the new dementia story in a nutshell, this idea that there is life beyond a diagnosis, that people with dementia remain a vital part of the community and deserve that chance to stay connected and engaged, that they are the experts on their own experience and can take the lead in considering what kind of programs would work well for them. And that as we work together as people throughout a community, we can transform what it means to live with dementia. Dementia is highly collaborative. So people with dementia and caregivers and other community members provide ideas and guide what kind of program would be interesting or engaging. Community organizations take the lead in actually offering programs. And then the programs get promoted through a joint website, momentiaseattle.org, and a Facebook page. And then it's kind of a one-stop shop of where people with dementia can go online and see, okay, what program is happening where and what might I want to engage in. A key part of the movement is that the programs take place in community settings, so not spaces that already have some maybe stigma associated with illness or disease or aging or dementia. So not purely, for example, in hospital or medical settings, but really thinking about what are those community spaces where they're meant to be for everyone, but they might not be totally accessible to people with dementia without some adjustments. So looking at places like libraries, faith communities, community centers, museums, and other kind of cultural spaces, parks, cafes, etc. And this, I think, is part of the beauty of Momentia, is just recognizing every community is so different. And yeah, maybe Seattle has a zoo. We happen to have a zoo walking program for people with dementia, but of course, not every community has a zoo. Some communities have a community garden that they can create a program out of. Some communities have a favorite neighborhood bar, like they start a program. It's like thinking about what is that special, what are the unique gems within a certain community, and what kind of program could be associated with it. Momentia also prioritizes focusing on the strengths that people with dementia maintain. And the programs that are set up are tailored towards strengths. So people can engage more easily. And so there actually can sometimes, ideally be that chance to even set aside that idea of being less than or not being able to do something because the activities are set up really based around present strengths. So things like procedural or how-to memory. So knowing, you see this image of Miriam holding a paintbrush, but like knowing what to do when you hold a paintbrush in your hand, or how to ride a bike, or how to strum a guitar if you've done that your whole life. Any of those kind of ingrained habit memories are still quite strong in people with dementia, or being able to recall memories of the distant past. So a program might be set up around things related to reminiscence. Other strengths include present moment awareness. It doesn't take short-term memory to be able to look at a piece of art and say what color stands out to you. It doesn't take short-term memory to be able to hear a beautiful piece of music and respond in the moment. Other examples of strengths, physical movement, being able to move around still, being able to walk or being able to dance. Nonverbal communication. Many of the creative arts and creative art programs can tap into that ability to communicate nonverbally. Again, like when you're painting, you don't need to even use words at all. And that can be a strength for people with dementia. imagination and creativity, again, can really flourish in the midst of dementia, and wisdom built up throughout life, among other strengths. But many of the programs are just built up really trying to hone in on some of these areas of strength so that they're more accessible to people with dementia. Now I'll go ahead and run through some examples, and these are primarily from the Seattle area, but there's a variety of programs like these happening in different parts of the state, including right there in Clark County as well. These two pictures were some of the very first programs for people with dementia that were set up within community organizations here in Seattle. On the left, there's an image of Taproot Theater's improv workshop. They call it Reignite the Mind. I like to tell stories about these programs because I have fond memories about when they started. That program started in the early 2010s, is that how you say it? Probably about 2011 or so. And it came about from, there was a gentleman with dementia named Roger, who was in an early stage memory loss program at a senior center that I was facilitating. In the midst of the program, he was talking about having difficulty getting his words out. And he had an aha moment. He said, I have a friend that does improv theater, and I wonder if there might be something in that for us, in terms of, those of us who have difficulty communicating or getting our words out correctly, so to speak. I wonder if improv could somehow help with that, or learning techniques of improv could help us communicate. And hearing him, I thought, wow, Roger, you're a genius. That's an amazing idea. And it so happened that there was a very small community theater right across the street from the senior center. And we went over and talked with the co-founder, Pam Nolte, about it. And it so happened that her mom had lived with Alzheimer's and had passed away in the last 5 years or so. And Pam was very, very excited about this idea of just giving it a try and seeing what might work in terms of improv and persons with dementia. And so she piloted some different improv workshops, and it's now grown to where Taproot Theater has trained several different theaters in Washington, including in Wenatchee and up in Bellingham quite recently, and how to do this approach. And if you Google, improv theater and dementia, you'll see a lot of different other groups and troupes around the US that are using improv for people with dementia. But I just love that here in Seattle and Washington, the idea came from a person with dementia who had that brilliance to recognize, I wonder if using improv could have something that could be beneficial for us. It could be a way to communicate differently. And improv itself is really founded on some of the strength-based approaches in terms of, you don't have to have a script, you don't have to remember lines. It's very present moment focused. It's all about using imagination and just saying yes to whatever comes. So it's really well set up for people with dementia, and also for caregivers to learn to kind of go with the flow and be adaptable to whatever happens in the moment too. On the right is a photo from the Frye Art Museum, which is also in Seattle. The Frye is a free art museum, and they, back in about 2010 or so, received some funding to be able to consider building out more of what they call creative aging programs, which are for older adults, but also specifically for people with dementia. One of the first programs that they developed was called Here Now, and it involved training museum docents to take through small groups of people with dementia and family caregivers and take a look at maybe 3 images in the museum, or 3 pieces in the museum. They'd spend 20 minutes or so in front of each one, and instead of grilling people on, what year was this painted? What was that painter's name, etc., the questions are very open-ended and accessible with no right or wrong answer. So they ask things like, what do you notice here? What stands out to you? How does it make you feel? And so everyone, anyone and everyone can answer. Again, there's no wrong answer. It's very engaging and accessible, and kind of it creates a leveling factor for the person with dementia and the caregiver to both be able to engage and both be able to connect with the piece. I think one of my favorite stories about this program, early on, I asked one of the participants named Cece, I asked her, what do you get out of this, Cece? Why do you come? Why do you do this art discussion program? And she said, Mary, when I leave the museum, I feel taller. I feel taller, which I thought was a beautiful way to express that idea of you've had an experience within sophisticated community setting, a museum. You've been treated like the adult that you are. You've been able to engage with art. The things that you've said have been accepted and heard by others. And when she left, she had that sense of, I'm standing taller. I'm proud. I'm dignified. I'm seen as a person. I'll go through another, I think 5 or 6 other programs. I don't have long stories for each one of them, but on the left here is an image from an Alzheimer cafe. I know that Hope Dementia Support is also doing a memory cafe right now, which is so exciting. Again, memory cafes or Alzheimer cafes are monthly informal social gatherings for people with dementia and family caregivers. This one shown here met at the Friar Art Museum's cafe, and it just moved over to the Memory Hub next door in the last year or so. But yeah, very informal, one of the simpler programs to set up. It can take place in any informal public setting, like a library, like a church or faith community, a museum, a community center, and can be very low budget, maybe just having some snacks and a chance to be together. Some memory cafes have activities programmed into them, like arts activities or sing-alongs or things as well. And I think one story that I love about memory cafes, early on, the second memory cafe in the nation started here in Seattle, again, back in like 2012 or so. And Roger, the man who had the idea for improv, was attending regularly. And he told me a story about, he had early stage memory loss. He told me a story about sitting down next to a man who wasn't able to communicate verbally. And for some people, they might have felt very uncomfortable and maybe headed to another table. I don't know what to do. But Roger decided to just stick around and engage with this man. And he said hello, and the man didn't respond verbally, but the man, pointed out his finger like this and kind of like stared at Roger intently. And Roger, maybe now he'd been doing improv a little bit for a while, but anyway, Roger decided, okay, this is what communication looks like today, and maybe I'll do the same. Maybe I'll do the same thing. And he just reached his finger across and touched fingers with that man who couldn't speak. And they sat there for a minute or so, just touching fingers and staring at each other. And Roger said, as he shared that story with me, he said, Mary, that was one of the most profound communication moments that I had ever in my life. Just sitting there silently, touching finger to finger and looking eye to eye with another individual with more profound dementia. And, those kind of connection points can be hard to come by with dementia, and something like a memory cafe or Alzheimer cafe can create the opportunity or the space for those connections to happen. On the right is another program that's been around for a while with Seattle Parks and Recreation and the UW Memory and Brain Wellness Center, called the Garden Discovery Program. This program morphed out of the original idea by a woman with dementia who used to be in forestry, who in a community forum said, I really miss getting my hands dirty. I miss digging in the dirt. And from there, we ended up going to a community farm. I think I actually have a picture of this program too, but ended up starting a volunteer program at a farm for people with dementia to come and weed and plant and engage with nature. And then it also evolved into a walking program that would walk through different parks and farm settings as well. The chance to be together, be out in the outdoors. Here we go. On the right, there's that woman, Martha, that I was talking about, who used to be in forestry. And that's her within the volunteer program that she helped instigate out at Rainier Beach Farm, Urban Farm in South Seattle. It happened once a month, and folks would come together, pull weeds or do some planting or any task that the farm identified, and then they would have lunch together there on site as well. On the left is a photo of another fairly simple program with Seattle Parks and Recreation. It's a walking program called Out and About. They meet every other week on a Friday morning, and there's anywhere from 6, 8, a dozen or a couple dozen people with dementia and family members out walking. They started at coffee shop. They have some nice social time, and then they walk a route through the neighborhood with a handful of volunteers that help spread out throughout the group and keep people together and on track. And just great exercise, a great chance to feel like, hey, I'm a part of this community too, and that social connection piece as well. And I know I keep on putting in plugs for Hope Dementia Support, but just heard from Lynn that they are starting up a walking group using some amazing dementia-friendly maps that were produced by them and some partners that are starting up just this week. So definitely check that out if you have a chance. All right, well, I think probably many of us have heard about the amazing powers of music in terms of helping people with dementia engage. And that power has definitely been tapped into in terms of programs in the Seattle area. So one example, there's a memory loss chorus at the Greenwood Senior Center in North Seattle called All Present. And the focus or priority audience is people with dementia, but they also invite anybody from the community to join in the chorus. And they meet once a week and sing through various old favorites and other tunes that are enjoyable and have a great time just connecting and enjoying the music. And then they periodically perform, which is a way of combining that social connection aspect with also the public awareness aspect of, hey, people with dementia are here in this community and have gifts to offer, including performing musically. On the right, this was a once a month drum circle program at another senior center in Seattle. This was an idea of somebody with dementia as well, who'd been a musician his whole life and thought doing some drumming with people would be pretty fun. And they pulled together, they got some donations of drums and found a facilitator that would lead them in a drum circle. And again, just a very simple connecting time, focusing in on the rhythm and the present moment and enjoying together. These are the last couple programs that I'll highlight, but on the left, I mentioned, in Seattle, we have a zoo. Lucky enough to have a program be able to be set up with the zoo and the Alzheimer's Association, where they're provided with free entry. And there's a walking program that meets there. Now, I think it's 3 days a week. There's 2 programs for people with early stage memory loss and 1 for people with more moderate dementia. And all the walks have, again, maybe a dozen or 16 or so people. There's a handful of volunteers that go with the groups. They enjoy walking through the zoo and seeing whatever exhibits are open, and then have time in the zoo cafe for coffee afterward for that social connection. The story I often tell about the zoo walk, again, because I feel like it's easy to hear these programs and think like, okay, walking program, what good is that? Or, how is it so amazing? But I remember early on, I asked one of the zoo walk participants, Alice, what she enjoyed and why she went to the zoo walk. And she said, Mary, when I was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my family stopped talking to me and I felt dirty. But then she gestured around to the group of walkers there with her at the zoo and she said, but I have found these people that are like my new family. And Alice said that after having walked with the group. It was only a couple months into it. And I think that really just hones in on, the profound social isolation that people can experience. And then the profound meaning of finding connection again and being able to be around people who don't set them aside, but who engage and who understand their experience. Last but not least, on the right is an image from a program. This also was the idea of a person with dementia and their spouse feeling like, I have dementia and I still feel like I have a lot to contribute and I'd like to give back. And I think that can be a common experience for people with dementia to feel like, well, I do have a lot to give, but I'm maybe not able to work anymore. I would love to be able to volunteer, give back, or contribute in some way. So this particular program came about through working with Northwest Harvest, which is the largest food bank in Washington. In Washington. And we worked with them to think through their volunteer opportunities and how they could be which volunteer opportunities might be best tailored to persons with dementia, and how to set up an opportunity for people with dementia and family members to come and volunteer there at the food bank and give back. And what we came up with was a focus on repackaging bulk food. So they would get these shipments of huge things of rice or beans or other types of dry goods, and the volunteer activity would include like scooping from that into smaller Ziplocs or other giveaway bags. So something that's like using habit memory or procedural memory of that scooping motion, doing that over and over and over, being able to do it alongside a loved one where you can chat and joke around at the same time, being part of a larger something. And it happened during hours where the food bank wasn't open, so it wasn't really like loud or there wasn't a lot going on. People could really just focus, have their experience of giving back in an environment that was accessible. So I hope it's been, maybe sparked something to see some examples of these programs. And again, there's a lot going on right there in Clark County as well, with music and with walking and other types of and memory cafes. So definitely check out Hope Dementia Support to see what's happening in that area. But as I move on from talking about programs, I'll just also say that, of course, during the beginning and mid and even now stage of COVID and the pandemic, there was a lot happening online with virtual equivalents of these types of community-based programs. So opportunities for people to still connect and still engage. And an example of this is Taproot Theater took their improv workshop and put it online. I never would have imagined you could do improv with people with dementia over Zoom, but they figured out how to do it. And a lot of other types of social and art engagement programs also went online. I will just touch on this briefly, but if you're interested in starting your own community-based dementia-friendly programs like the types that we've talked about, if you go to the Dementia Seattle website, you can find a resource for these tips for getting started. But I thought I'd just mention briefly here some of the ways that I encourage people who are just beginning, thinking through what could I do here in my community. First step being listen up, meaning it can be really easy or tempting to maybe sit in your own office or wherever, at home by yourself and imagine what a person with dementia might want to do in your community. But definitely first things first is to somehow reach out, or maybe you are a person with dementia or a caregiver already and you know what you would want, but if you're not, reaching out and getting input from people with dementia in your community in terms of what they would like to do, what community spaces feel enjoyable to them, what are those like hidden gems in the community spaces that they enjoy going to. And I've done this before a lot of times using photo images or actual tangible objects. Like I've done forums where there's pictures of a lot of different activities as well as physical objects like a paintbrush or a guitar or a baseball bat, and invite people to choose one thing that draws them basically, and then to show what it is and to use that as a jumping off point to think about what community activities would be enjoyable. A second tip would be to work with others. So really looking for those opportunities to collaborate and think about what can I offer as an organization or person, and how can I work with others versus feeling like I've got to do it all myself. Third tip being use community assets. So hopefully you saw in those programs that I talked about ways that some of the assets in this area have been used, but thinking about, is there a cafe that people love going to? Could there be a memory cafe program set up there? Is there a public garden or park that's just a beautiful spot that people love? Could there be a walking group that gets set up there, or a gardening program or something like that? Is there a bowling alley? Is there a library with a reading note? Just thinking about what's there in your community and making use of it. Fourth tip being pursue open doors. For me, an example of that open door was walking across the street from the senior center over to Taproot Theater and saying, hey, we have this idea about improv for people with dementia. What do you think? And the director of the theater saying, yeah, let's give it a try. That was a very big open door. It definitely could have been, that she said, no, absolutely not. And I wouldn't have kept on pressing on that door if she said, nah, I'm not so interested. I would have tried a different theater or a different approach, looking for that click and that sense of like, yeah, we're on the same page and we want to move forward. And then lastly, an encouragement to keep it simple. I am not that great at this. I think I tend to start thinking about like, oh, wow, a dementia-friendly circus, it would be amazing. But honestly, something so simple like a once a month social meetup for coffee at a Starbucks in your local community can be so meaningful, especially for people who feel like their day-to-day life is very isolated. So feeling like it's okay really to move forward with the simplest option first and seeing how it goes versus trying to create something very elaborate. Again, if you want more info on starting up programs, you can look at the momentiaseattle.org website. I'm also happy to talk with you about starting programs, and Lynn, also from Hope Dementia Support, I'm sure would be happy to share about how she's gone about setting up some new programs lately. If you look on this website, momentiaseattle.org, you'll also see a community calendar with examples of the different kinds of programs happening in the area. All right, I did want to just mention briefly, again, on that wider theme of social engagement and social connection within building a dementia-friendly community, I wanted to mention the Memory Hub. So this is a space that it's a community center set up specifically to welcome people with dementia and their families. So it's very similar to like a senior center, but all the programs are geared toward living well with dementia. So as an example, today we did a puppetry workshop for people with dementia, and you know, we do other things like caregiver education workshops. We do once a month classes or orientations for people who are recently diagnosed with memory loss. There's a garden discovery program that happens in the garden there, and other primarily support, education, and social engagement opportunities. So you're also welcome to take a look at the calendar there, or again, to reach out if you want to brainstorm about various programs that could come to your area. So to wrap up on that theme of social engagement in building dementia-friendly communities, I'll return again to Mary. She was the one that had mentioned her doctor telling her to stay active and stay social, and that was the best advice she'd ever gotten. Another quote from her, she says, "You kind of feel free because you have this situation that you can't do a lot about, so you might as well do the things you really want to do, the things at the top of your list. I've tried new things like folk dancing and drumming, so you don't feel like your life is draining away. No, it can get richer in some ways." And I appreciate her quote in terms of, again, recognizing the difference it can make to set up some of these types of engaging, accessible activities within a community. It can provide that opportunity for a person's life to get richer, even in the midst of living with dementia. The last piece that I want to share about, so talking about dementia-friendly communities, I honed in on this idea of starting with raising awareness and challenging stigma, and then considering social engagement programs that can be developed within community spaces. I also just want to touch on an approach and some resources that comes out of a national organization called Dementia Friendly America. And Dementia Friendly America really advocates for what they call a multi-sector approach. So pulling together a coalition of people that represent all the different sectors or parts of your community, coming up with a plan together for how are we going to move forward and make all parts of our community more dementia friendly, our transportation systems, our housing systems, our first responders and other medical systems, and so on. And so I just want to let everyone know, if you haven't heard of Dementia Friendly America, the kinds of tools and resources that they have available too. This is a snapshot from their website, and it's dfamerica.org. And you can see under tools and resources, that drop-down menu, they have sector guides, sector videos, community toolkits, writer tools, etc. So a lot of things there that you can tap into, and they're all free to just take a look at or to distribute in your area or in your workplace or neighborhood. They provide a community toolkit for moving forward, like as a city or as a county or even as a state, and becoming dementia friendly. And within that toolkit, they outline 4 different phases in becoming more dementia friendly. And I'm not going to go too much into this, but basically the first one is convening. So bringing together stakeholders that represent different parts of the community to make an action team. And then they move forward to engage additional key leaders in the community that help make a difference. And then analyze, they do an assessment, recommend doing an assessment process around how dementia friendly is our community. They analyze that. And then that last phase is acting together to implement plans to make the community more dementia friendly based on the evaluation that you've done. So this process, it hasn't been implemented in very many places in Washington so far, but at this point, Spokane County is the main area that we can point to in Washington in terms of how they've been moving forward with this. And it's great to have a model to look at and to be mentored in. So if it's something that's of interest to you and the community that you're in, I could definitely help connect you with people that are doing this kind of full community effort over in Spokane. Even if you're not wanting to go through that whole 4-step process within your community, there's a lot of other guides and resources that are available from Dementia Friendly America. And this is, again, just some snapshots from the website about the types of guides that they have. So they've created whole, guides for banks and financial services, like handouts that you could even give to people within a bank or financial sector to think about how do you approach persons with dementia that are coming in here as clientele. Or same with healthcare, same with just kind of guides you could give out in your neighborhood to help them think through dementia a little bit more and how to be supportive. So mainly just wanted you to know about this as a resource. All right, I wanted to end on this idea of what are some concrete steps that we could do today to move forward in making our communities more dementia friendly wherever we live. So the first option or idea that I had was encouraging everyone, if you haven't yet, to become a dementia friend. That means going to a 1-hour dementia friends talk, and that can be online. It can also be in person, and that covers those 5 key messages about dementia. And you can do that by finding who's the lead in your county for that program. If you go to dementiafriendswa.uw.edu and reaching out to them to see when is their next Dementia Friends session happening and attending one of those. And if you're already a Dementia Friend, you can tell somebody else about becoming a Dementia Friend. And that's a great way of helping become more dementia aware and encouraging other people to become more dementia aware as well. Another action step that you could do would be to look up that in the beginning, I was talking about those 9 factors of what is a dementia friendly community. That's in the form of a handout here for Washington State. And you're definitely welcome to download that. It's free PDF fact sheet, and you can distribute it anywhere that you think people might be interested within your community. Another possible next step could be to volunteer for a dementia-friendly program in your community. Again, recommending reaching out to Hope Dementia Support, see if they might need any help with the programs they're getting started. Or you could help start a program in your area if one doesn't yet exist. I do encourage you to take a look at that momentaseattle.org website and community calendar to get ideas and to also see that a little bit more about the tips for getting started. And then lastly, another step could be reviewing some of those resources from Dementia Friendly America to see what might be useful in your community with where you're at. Those would be some thoughts that I might have in terms of next steps. I'm really happy to chat with people about your own communities and ideas you have for becoming more dementia friendly. And I hope that it's been useful to think through a little bit about what does it mean to be a dementia friendly community, some of those key initial themes that many communities move forward within, including raising awareness and starting social engagement programs, and that you have some ideas for resources and next steps at your fingertips. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to go ahead and stop for now and see if we have any questions that I can attempt to answer. Thank you.
Well, we have a participant from the Seattle area, and she says, how can I find a memory cafe in South King County near Kent or Auburn?
That's a great question. Nothing is coming to mind for me in that area right now, which is, and I don't want to say you could start one yourself, but I'm gonna put into the chat a link for a memory cafe directory. It's a national directory, so the caveat is that it's not always fully up to date completely, at least when I've looked at it. But that's a place to start in terms of looking to see, even being able to look and see, even if it's not totally up to date, being able to see what used to be happening and being able to reach out to who organized it that might be able to point you in a good direction. In terms of ones that are a little bit more, right, so right now there's one at the Memory Hub, which is right in Seattle itself. And then there's one in at the McMinimans in Bothell. That's not south, but that's like kind of in the Seattle area. And there used to be one in Tacoma that's not operating right now. So really right now, I feel like it's just been in the last 3 to 6 months that we're seeing the beginnings of memory cafes again. So I guess my encouragement would be take a look at that list in that website there, see if there's anything close to you where you could at least reach out to the current or former organizers to see what the status is. And then if you, I'm gonna put another link in the chat of a document about how to start an Alzheimer cafe, which not a lot of people necessarily have time or capacity to start one up themselves, but you could definitely take that resource and guide to a community organization in your area, like a senior center, and say, hey, this is really important to me. I'd like to give this toolkit, and I encourage you to move forward. But it'll just take me a second to find it. I'm happy to, if there are other questions while I'm Googling, I'm happy to.
So a very basic question, which I think you may feel that you have answered, but why is a dementia-friendly community important?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think going back to some of those quotes in the beginning from Miriam and Bob, who live with dementia, I think from their perspective, a dementia-friendly community means that when they go out into their, I mean, it can mean the difference between leaving your home or not leaving your home, in terms of whether or not you feel like if you go out and about into the places that you used to feel like you belonged, whether you're respected and understood, whether there are things that are accessible to you or not. So I think, yeah, I think a dementia-friendly community is important because people deserve the opportunity to stay connected within their communities and to the people and places that they love and belong to. And so by making those small or large changes within a community, we can make sure that that happens versus kind of setting people aside or having them fall into isolation.
I guess I would add to that the care partner is somebody that is impacted by the stigma and the isolation.
Absolutely.
So I think there's some help there as well. What barriers have you seen in making a community dementia friendly in your experience?
I think some of the barriers that I've seen, I mean, the frustrating huge barrier was the pandemic, in terms of having seen a lot of growth happen in our state up until then, and then feeling like things took a big pause at that point. But besides that, if I set aside the pandemic, I think some of the barriers are if you're trying to actually work within an organization or advocate for an organization to do something like advocate for your local senior center to start a program or a museum or a cafe. I think it can be sometimes hard to find the right person that has the time, energy, and interest to say yes. Sometimes there can be funding barriers if whatever program you're trying to start up requires a lot of funding. And then I think, sorry, I just forgot one of the main ones. What was it? I think it can be hard to actually find the people with dementia within a community, whether because people are already very isolated or just those networks don't already exist. So even when, for example, a senior center decides, oh, I'd like to start a course for people with memory loss, I think, especially initially, it can be hard if they don't already have that network or connection to people with dementia or caregivers to find the people in the community, and to consider what would you like to do and then to move forward from there.
So, other than Dementia Friends, what community education has happened to help foster a dementia-friendly community?
Well, Hope Dementia Support sets up these wonderful webinars on a monthly basis. That's one thing I'll point to. But otherwise, I definitely would want to mention the Alzheimer's Association, and they have a wide menu of educational offerings that they offer virtually and also do in-person presentations on topics like Alzheimer's and Dementia 101, the 10 warning signs of dementia, communication tips for interacting with people with dementia, addressing different challenging behaviors that can come up, financial planning for caregivers, and then kind of special topics like more for people with younger onset Alzheimer's or other atypical dementias as well. So definitely recommend connecting with the Alzheimer's Association for education.
How is a dementia-friendly community beneficial to everyone in the community?
I love that question. I think very similar to how ADA improvements can end up, for example, curb cuts help people who use wheelchairs. They also help people who are pushing a stroller. I mean, there's like that added benefit of inclusivity to all. But I think having a dementia-friendly community means that, well, one, I'm biased in that I feel like my life improves when I interact with people with dementia out and about in my community, and my quality of life decreases if I never meet a person with dementia. And so I think, like, even as an example, in my faith community, I feel like I want persons with dementia to continue being able to connect and engage even when they have dementia, versus suddenly you never see them again. I want those relationships to continue because they're important to me. So I feel, and I don't have dementia, I'm not a caregiver, but it's important to me to stay connected within my community. So I feel like there's mainly a benefit to all in terms of the fabric of your community not being ripped apart based on a disease process, or one particular disease process. So that's one thing that I would say. And then I also think dementia-friendly communities help set a model for inclusiveness and recognizing that we're all different. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, we all have things in our health or bodies that work well, we all have things that don't work as well, and really setting a standard that everyone belongs regardless of what's working well or not working well.
So would you mind explaining the picture about community hanging on the wall behind you? Somebody has really good eyes. She says, what is it about? I can't read the content, but I've been involved in community development and I am so curious.
This is amazing. Well, I'm sitting here in my kitchen, and when I turned on my Zoom, I thought, oh, how ironic that there's something that says how to build community in my background. So this is just a poster, and it's titled How to Build Community, and then it has about 25 different ways to build community. Things like leave your house, know your neighbors, look up when you're walking, greet people, sit on your stoop, plant flowers, use your library, take children to the park, have potlucks, honor elders, pick up litter. Anyway, if you Google
awesome.
Poster about how to build community, you could find this exact one. This poster was at my local senior center, and I just loved it so much I had to get one for myself.
Perfect. So are there specific types of businesses that you have seen more engaged in the idea of dementia-friendly communities?
Yeah. So there are some that you might expect, for example, like home care agencies or long-term care agencies sometimes can get excited about, especially if you're like building a coalition about making our community more dementia friendly. Businesses that's already their primary audience or clientele oftentimes can bring a lot of energy. They might also be able to provide some funding for what you're doing. It's one of my favorite ways to engage with for-profit businesses is inviting them to the table with a specific role of sponsorship, with some parameters around in terms of it's not going to be like a sales pitch opportunity. But yeah, so I think businesses that already have people with dementia or caregivers as their primary clientele or audience oftentimes have some energy around it. But then outside of that, I think I've seen interest just in like small town, like local storefronts having interest in for example, communities like where Don Reddington lived in Twist, like small town community where people feel like, oh yeah, I know people with dementia here in my town, they come to my library, they come to my hardware store or whatever. There can be some of that, like when there's already that sense of knowingness and sense of community connectedness, it can be easier for a business to say like, oh yeah, I'd love to do a little training for my employees and let them know, everybody at the hardware store here know how to interact with Joe when he comes to get something at the shop. And then I think memory cafes or Alzheimer cafes oftentimes have been set up within actual cafes or restaurants. So examples, I've seen them at many coffee shops. I've seen them at McMiniman's in Bothell, at Denny's. I'm trying to think of what other examples, pubs. So, and what you're looking for there is a restaurant that maybe people enjoy, but also maybe has good parking, good accessibility, and has a space that's big enough where people can come, maybe a dozen or 24 people can come together at a certain time, and maybe where even they have quieter times a day where all those people could come together at the same time. It's not going to be super, super crowded or overwhelming. Anyway, so those type of actual like cafes, coffee shops, restaurants, I've seen be very receptive because, they're serving the community. They're maybe getting some additional patrons when during slower time of day when they wouldn't normally otherwise have folks coming by as much. So yeah, that's been my other experience in terms of who kind of gets excited about this.
Well, a plug for our memory cafe, which is tomorrow at La Tida for everyone. But they were very receptive when we approached them. They're a very popular coffee place and fairly centrally located. But without us asking them, what they have done is put a sign up that says we're a dementia cafe.
Amazing.
So, and we didn't talk about it. They just did that. And I thought, awesome.
That's so cool.
That shows a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. So one last question, unless other people have questions, is, has the Seattle area done any marketing around dementia-friendly communities, such as billboards or public service announcements or mailers, those kind of things?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Throughout time, we've done different avenues of marketing. We haven't done billboards. We've done what do you call these things? Like bus ads, I guess, or like ads on the sides of buses.
Right.
Yeah, showing images of people with dementia engaged in the community with like a short statement about, there's people with dementia in our midst, let's show respect, or things like that. And then we've done a lot with, partially that idea of creating this movement. Momentia was the idea of like, let's have one term to call everything that's happening, whether it's at the Friar Art Museum or whether it's at the zoo or whether it's at a coffee shop, all these kind of community-based social engagement programs. Let's put them under one umbrella so that we can point people to all of it at the same time, having a shared collective website online. So once we had a shared website and one kind of place to point people to, we developed very simple marketing, but just a very simple rack card that had some photos of a few of the different community activities in the website URL. And then we did tabling at conferences, and what else were common things we do with those rat cards? Yeah, primarily like community events and conferences. We did a few mailings as well. And then we tried very hard anytime there was opportunities for press via the media, like radio or TV news or print news, to get attention of the media and to do like bring them in, have them do interviews with people with dementia, have them highlight the different programs happening. So we had a lot of success definitely with that. Definitely with that as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I have absolutely loved listening to you. And I know that everyone else has as well. So just awesome. Wanted everybody to know that our education for next month will be Colleen's story from the Peace Health Bereavement Program, who will be talking about anticipatory grieving. As we know that when you have a loved one with dementia, it is a protracted time and you're often grieving long before they're gone. So that will be on the last Tuesday of August at 6:30 in the evening. And some of this information that Marigrace has provided for us, we will send out when we send out the video. And we do videotape. I don't know if we even asked you if that was okay, but but we will post it on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. So Marigrace Becker, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Lynn and Julie and all who were here today. I so appreciate it.
I see some thank yous up here as well. So now you can end your day.
All right, you too. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.